Hi, baby. And put your blanket on. You're gonna need it tonight. It's gonna be cold, cold. Cold, cold. Ah, baby. Oh. She's like, I feel so humiliated. But you'll appreciate it tonight, girl. I know, baby. Sophie, Sophie. Hello, friends. Welcome back to Cosmopolitan Cornbread. So I thought I would come out here and sit down here on the swing for a minute. I'm out in the garden area looking at all sorts of dead vines and sad plants and, and thinking of how in the next week or two I need to get out here and get all this cleared out and start working on adding more compost to the beds and everything, and thinking about the next the next gardening season. But getting out here, of course, is going to really be dependent upon the weather. We had this beautiful, deceptive warm snap and ended up having, 80-degree weather for several days. It kind of tricked everything, tricked the goats into beginning to shed their winter coat. They're looking like woolly mammoths and fluff going everywhere, and we've got plants starting to peek out of the ground here and there, like some daffodils and things like that. But we've also had a lot of rain. You can probably see the waterfall back there. It's a full waterfall right now, or one of the little spots there in the creek. Right now we are right back into being super cold. Freeze warnings and everything else. It's going to be super cold tonight. It barely got over freezing today for a high, and it's going to be cold for the next several days. We had a lot of rain. We were getting warnings about ice storms and things like that, and we didn't get that, but we did get a lot of rain and then a lot of cold and ice everywhere. With the very cold temperatures coming, we went ahead and put Sophie's blanket on her. She's our miniature mule. Amos doesn't seem to care too much about the cold, but in the very cold temperatures we had a few weeks ago, Sophie was shivering, and you don't want to see your animal shivering, so we got her a blanket, and she doesn't seem to care for it a whole lot. She kind of acts like she's embarrassed when we put it on her. She acts like we've humiliated her, but I'm sure she appreciates it because when she has it on, she's not shivering. The first time we put it on her, Amos was chasing her all around their area like he had something new to play with. She might not appreciate it when we put it on her, but I'm sure she appreciates not shivering. I thought while I was sitting out here for a couple of minutes, I would just share something. Someone had asked me in a comment or an email, I think it was a comment on a video, asking me about getting started researching genealogy. I've shared in a couple videos here and there over the years how for a long time one of my hobbies was researching genealogy. Now, I'm a little bit of a history buff, and I love, researching stuff like that. So genealogy was kind of right up my alley. Now, my interest in genealogy, the family tree, came about several years ago, actually when I was a brand new mom with my first child. It made me curious about family history and all of that. And I had reached out to my grandmothers and asked both of them to give me all the information that they knew of the family tree. And so both of my grandmothers back then, and we're talking, this was the very early 90s, wrote me letters detailing every person in the family tree that they could think of, and like where people came from and all of that. And, really all I had for a long time were those letters. I kind of kept the letters, put them away, and that was as much information as I would be able to have for a long time. Well, then, a decade or so later, the internet is a thing. And the advent of the internet gave us the ability to research and dig through historical records in other places. And now at this time, when I started really researching, I don't think Ancestry.com existed at the time, but there was other resources. There were websites like Find a Grave and Roots Web and other forums where people were researching family trees by specific names. And so I would go through those websites and forums and things like that. There was a website, and it still exists, called Family Search. And now that website, it's put together by the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, because ancestry and all of that is kind of a thing. It's part of their religion. But all of the resources, all of the historical records, the census records, the birth certificates, death certificates, all of these historical records that are available online through their website are available for free. And so because of that, I was able to search databases, search through names, dates, locations, and all of this, and find a lot more of my family tree. Now, today the website's way different. There's so many more tools available now, not only there, but also Ancestry.com. They're both very similar with their capabilities. Now, Ancestry.com, you do have to pay for it. They have different tiers, like if you want to search for records in Europe and things like that, well, then you have to pay more. They kind of like, oh, well, your family tree has too many people. You've got to up your up your plan. Family Search has all of that stuff for free. So that is an excellent resource. Honestly, I've gotten more out of FamilySearch.com, I believe it is. I'll put a link to it in the video description down below. But it gives you the ability to build a family tree, to put in all of your information, and I'll get suggestions from time to time. Now with Ancestry.com, you'll put in family tree stuff, and then there'll be a little leaf, and it's a hint. Like, hey, you might be able to connect this tree to this tree, and that might be the same person. Well, Ancestry or FamilySearch.com kind of does the same thing. Every so often there will be records that will get added into the database, and they'll say, hey, we think this is the same person in your family tree. And you can look at the data and see, oh, that is the same person. Now, when I would look at the records, census records, birth certificates, all of that, you know, I spent years doing this. When my husband deployed to Iraq for the first time, and the second time, third time, you know, when he went on all of these military deployments, it was actually how I kept my mind busy at night. The kids were little and they would go to bed and I would have free time. And I didn't want to spend my evenings in my head worrying about my husband. And so I kept my mind occupied by doing all of this family tree research. And when I would come across a record for one person, I would not add additional members of the family to my tree unless I could find another record to corroborate that information, because families are going to have similar names. You know, you might find a couple, you know, Mary and John, and they have a child named such and such, and their dates are similar, and everything's similar. But until you find another document corroborating that, yes, that indeed that is the person in your family, I would never add another name or another tier, you know, another generation to my family tree until I had more than one document to verify that indeed this was the same person. So I was very cautious about how I did it. But again, this took years. This took years to go through and do. And but Family Search will send you emails from time to time, and they'll say, hey, you know, there's been new records added, and we have found someone of interest in your family tree that you might be, you know, curious to find out about. For instance, I got an email last year, you know, because I would go through these family trees, and generally, most of my attention I paid to, I paid most of my attention to the direct parents, like the grandparents and the great-great-grandparents and the 20 times great-grandparents and things like that. I never really dug into all of the children in each of those generations. And interestingly, I discovered last year through an email that I am a first cousin, no, yes, first cousin, I forget how many times removed, to Benjamin Franklin. So Benjamin Franklin was my first cousin, and I forget how many generations back. I'll put it up here in the corner. I have it written down. And so you find people like that in the family tree, and it's very curious and interesting to find. But you know, nowadays it is a lot easier because there is so much more available on the internet. You know, if you're just getting started, Ancestry.com might be a good resource, but again, you're going to have to pay for it. The bigger your family tree gets, the more information you need, the further back you go, the more it's going to cost you. I think Family Search is a great place to get started, and it's completely for free. But the first thing that you would want to do if you're going to start researching your family tree is go through, talk to your relatives, talk to the oldest relatives that you have, write down every name, every place, every date you can possibly get. One of the things that helped me, because, you know, after I had researched my family tree and had gone way back on many of my branches, and I really got to the point where there was nothing left that I could find. My in-laws had me research their side of the family tree for Mr. Smith. And the way I got started with that was sitting down with them, asking them for every name, every place, every date, everyone they could think of. I went through family Bibles. I looked for stacks of obituaries, because obituaries are full of names that, you know, your relatives may not remember. So going through all of those things were super, super helpful, and that's where I would start. I would take those names, I would do searches looking for parents, looking for siblings, and just bit by bit I would add a generation here, a generation there, and ever so slowly there would be more and more branches to the family tree. And so that's really where you want to start, is gathering all of the information that you possibly can. I will say, as you go through your family tree, as you start searching for more names, more generations, you do want to be flexible with spellings. One of the things that I learned early on was that when records were created, spelling was subjective. For instance, one of my family branches is Ingalls. And my grandmother, my grandma Ingalls, her name was spelled Engels. However, you go back a few generations, and it was spelled with an I. Ingalls. Same family, different spelling. There was a couple of generations where there were several members of the same family who were all part of this one particular church in McHenry, Illinois. And when you looked at the church records, you would see siblings who were all married and christened and all these things in this church, but they would all have different spellings of their names. And it all boiled down to, how did the priest who wrote that record sound out the name? And that's how it ended up getting spelled. And so you have to be very flexible with the spelling. Just because it's not spelled the same doesn't mean it isn't the right person. It could very well be the exact same person, or the exact person that you need. It was just, again, things were written down phonetically. It wasn't like today where you've got computers and databases and everything is all streamlined. The census records, you know, all of that stuff was generally done phonetic. So you do have to be flexible with the spellings of names, or the changing of the name. For instance, I had an ancestor named Franz Müller was his name when he was in Germany. So his birth certificate and his marriage record said Franz Müller. When he died, his death certificate was Frank Miller. Same person, but the name had become Americanized when he came to the United States. So that's another thing to keep in mind. So nowadays, with so many family trees being online, being public, it's really a lot easier to make connections. And to expand your family tree and research it and find all of these things. You know, I spent years and years and years doing, back then, checking records one by one. And now, you know, they've got the algorithms and the search engines and everything that can do a lot of the work for you. So it's a lot easier now than it was back then. But again, it all begins with the collections of the names. That's going to be your foundation. That's going to be where you get started. So talk to your relatives. If this is something that you're interested in doing and interested in getting started with, talk to all your relatives. If you've got grandparents, aunts and uncles, talk to every relative that you can get a hold of and ask them for every bit of information that they know of. And just kind of, that's where you would start. And from there, just enjoy the adventure of it. And, you know, it can be pretty interesting to see the things that you can find. I've always enjoyed that TV show. It's usually celebrities, and I can't remember the name of it now, but it was like Who Do You Think You Are, or something like that. I think that's what it was called. And you see just the stories and all of that, of where people came from, and stories of relatives and things like that. And you know, the history buff in me has always enjoyed that sort of stuff. So in any case, I'm going to head on up. It is very cold and I need to go make dinner. Mr. Smith has requested chicken and dumplings for dinner, so I'm going to head on in there and make that. I hope that is helpful to those of you who've been curious about it. If you have any other questions, leave them in the comments and I will do my best to answer. And again, I'll put a link to that one website in particular that I think is very helpful in the video description down below. So thanks for spending a little bit of time with me out here today. My name is Constance from Cosmopolitan Cornbread, and I'll talk to y'all next time.